Hello everyone, Miss Carol here. Thanks for coming back today as we continue our story of the new king of the Israelites. God didn't want them to have a king, did he? Because he was the king over them, but they wanted to be like every other nation around them, didn't they? And so God said, all right, we'll just give them what they want. That's what we'll do. And if you remember, Saul and his servant were looking for his father's donkeys, and they realized, well, maybe Samuel, the prophet, could tell them where his father's donkeys were. But God had already spoken to Samuel earlier and told him there's going to be a man named Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, and he's the one I've chosen to be king, and I want you to anoint him as the new king. And secretly, that's exactly what Samuel did. He sent Saul's servant on the way after feeding Samuel at a feast in town, and he sent his servant on the way. So secretly he anointed Saul as the new king of Israel. And he gave Saul some signs so that he would know that what he was doing was actually from God. And in a few days, he gathered the people of Israel together, Samuel did, and he told them their new king was Saul. And if you remember, they couldn't find Saul, and he was hiding out among the baggage. He was very humble at that time, and he didn't really want to be the leader, but God had chosen him, and he stood a head taller than anybody else, so everyone was quite impressed. Oh, he's going to make a great king. They were just looking on the outside, weren't they? Not what was in his heart. But the Bible does tell us that God's Spirit entered his heart, changed his heart. And so Saul was now the new king. Now some people didn't like that, and but other people were glad to finally have a king. I think they did. The others didn't know him and thought, why somebody from Benjamin? But God knows what he's doing, doesn't he? And so pretty soon after he's made king, those Philistines began to attack. And they attacked a town, if you remember, called Jabesh Gilead, and they asked for help. So Saul gathered 330,000 men together, and they fought and they won that battle. And after winning that battle, once again, now in front of everyone, Samuel anoints him king again, just to let everybody know this is God's choice. So he is the one. He is now your king. And at first, Saul seemed to be a very good king. He was constantly having to fight battles against the Philistines, who were continually trying to take over. The problem was when Joshua told them to take over the land from the Philistines, if you can see, they did not take over any of this land. They ended up leaving it. They said it was too hard to do. Nothing is too hard for God, though, right? But so now they're paying for their mistakes, because now the Philistines want their land back, and they're constantly fighting the Israelites about that. So let's begin reading in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 5. And it tells us that the Philistines had gathered to fight Israel once again. They had 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers, as many soldiers as there were the sand of the sea. They could not, sand on the seashore, they couldn't even be counted. And that's how many they gathered to fight against the Israelites. And when the men of Israel saw that the situation was very, very critical, and that their army was not big enough, what were they going to do? They began hiding. They didn't think, oh, it doesn't matter. God's with us. We can do this. They started hiding. They started hiding in caves and in bushes, among the rocks and in pits and in wells. And some of them even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad. If you remember, the tribe of Gad, part of the tribe of Gad, decided that they didn't want to cross over the Jordan. They wanted their land over here. So some of the soldiers were crossing over the Jordan River into the territory of Gad just to get away from having to fight the Philistines. They were that afraid. But Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops were with him, but they were all shaking with fear. That's not a good thing when you're getting ready to go into battle if your men are shaking with fear, is it? Saul waited 7 days because Samuel told him he would come and he would offer burnt offerings and sacrifices to the Lord to get them ready for the battle, to get so the Lord would be with them. But Saul waited the 7 days, the time set by Samuel, and Samuel hadn't come yet. And Saul's men began to leave and run away. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offerings, and the fellowship offerings, and I will do it myself." Wait a minute. Who's supposed to offer sacrifices? Only the priest, right? Samuel was the priest. But Saul decides, nope, I'm going to just do it myself. If he doesn't come, I'll just do it myself. And just as he had finished offering the sacrifices to God, Samuel shows up. And Samuel arrived, and Samuel went out, and Saul went and tried to greet him. But all Samuel did was say, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "Well, when I saw that my men were all scattering and running away, and that you didn't come at the time you said you were coming, well, I knew that the Philistines were gathering together and they were getting ready to fight me. And I thought, now they're going to come, and I haven't asked the Lord to be with me. So I felt like I had to offer the burnt offering before I went to war." Samuel said, "Saul, you have acted very foolishly today. You have not kept the commands of the Lord. If you had, he would have made your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom is not going to last. The Lord has already found another man that is after his own heart, and he is going to make him leader of the people because you have not kept the Lord's commands." And then Samuel left Gilgal, and Saul counted the men that were with him, and there were 600 of them. Saul has really made a bad mistake now, hasn't he? He doesn't seem to be so humble anymore now, does he? He seems to be a little proud. Oh, if the priest doesn't come, if Samuel doesn't come, I'll just do it myself. After all, I'm the king. But that wasn't the king's position to do, was it? That was the priest's job. And he seems to be forgetting that God is the one in charge, not him. He may be the king, but God is the true king. He's the one in charge. He should have obeyed him. Now he's going to have to go fight with 600 men, and with an army that there's so many men, it's like the sand on the seashore. They can't even be counted. So the problem was, and here we begin in verse 19, not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel. Now, a blacksmith is someone that works with iron and makes tools, and he makes weapons, and he sharpens tools, and he sharpens weapons. But the Philistines had taken them all away. All the blacksmith, all the men trained to do that. Because he said, otherwise, these Israelites will make swords and spears and fight against us. And the only way the Israelites could get any of their tools sharpened was to go to the Philistines and pay them to do it. And now, on the day of battle, and this is really scary, not one soldier had a weapon, not a spear, not a sword, except for Saul and his son Jonathan. You mean these men are going out to war without any weapons? Well, they didn't have any true weapons like a sword or a spear, but they were probably farmers and so forth, so maybe they would take with them, who knows, a hammer, a hoe, whatever they could find, I'm sure. An axe. They could take an axe, couldn't they? A sickle, which they would have cut the grain with. That's sharp. And they probably had bows and arrows, but bows and arrows are okay if you're far away, but you can't do hand-to-hand battle with a bow and arrows. So his army was really in deep trouble, weren't they? And so let's begin reading again, 1 Samuel 14 with verse 6, and let's find out what they plan to do now. So Jonathan, who's the prince, he's the son of Saul, he said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of the Philistines. Maybe the Lord will help us if we go. Nothing can stop the Lord from saving, whether there's many of us or just a few of us. God can do anything." It's too bad that Jonathan's dad Saul hadn't realized that, huh? And his armor-bearer said, "Do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I'm with you heart and soul. Whatever you want to do, Prince Jonathan, I'll do it with you." Jonathan said, "Come then, we will cross over toward the men and we'll let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we'll climb up, because that will be the Lord's sign to us that he is going to help us win this victory." So both of them showed themselves to the enemies, to the Philistines. And the Philistines said, "Look, those Israelites are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in." And the men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan, his armor-bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." Now remember, Jonathan had said, if they say, "Come up to us," then God's going to be with us in this. He's going to give us the victory. So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." So Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet, with his armor-bearer right behind him. And the Philistines fell down before Jonathan as they were fighting them. And his armor-bearer followed him, and they killed over 20 men right there. And then panic struck the whole Philistine army, those in the camp and the field and those in the outpost, and the ground shook. But it was a panic caused by God. So Saul had men that were looking out and guarding, and they saw their army of the Philistines just melting away in all directions. And then Saul said to the men who were with him, "Gather the forces together. Someone is missing from our group." And when they did, they realized it was Jonathan, his son, and his armor-bearer who were not there. Then Saul and all his men assembled and went to battle. And they found the Philistines in total confusion. God had just set them up in so much confusion, they didn't even know it was just two men that had been attacking them. And so they struck each other. The Philistines were striking each other with their own swords. They were killing one another. And so those Israelites who had been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. And when all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they also joined the battle, and they ran after them. So the Lord rescued Israel that day. All right, so God was with them because Jonathan trusted in God, didn't he? Jonathan was the brave one who was willing to take his life in his own hand and go up there. So there's Jonathan, because the battle was the Lord's, but it would have never happened and they would have never won that battle against that huge army if Jonathan hadn't had that courage to go out and say, let's just do this. Whether there's only two of us or whether there's thousands of us, God can do anything. And he trusted God, didn't he? And so that day, they won their battle. All right, so now let's begin in chapter 15. And we'll start with verse 4. So now the Lord said, I am grieved that I ever made Saul king. But Samuel came to Saul and he said, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So I want you to listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am now going to punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they attacked them as they were coming up out of Egypt years ago. Do you remember when Moses was leading the people out of Egypt and the Amalekites came down and started attacking them and Joshua went out to fight them? And you know, as long as Moses was holding up his staff, they were winning, but when he dropped his arms, they were losing. Do you remember? That was the battle with the Amalekites. God is still angry with the Amalekites for ever attacking the Israelites that day. So he said, I will punish them for what they did. Now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them, put them all to death, including all of their cattle and sheep and donkeys, camels. So Saul gathered his men, and he managed to gather 210,000 men to come and join him. And they went to the city of Amalek, and they set an ambush for them. And Saul attacked them all the way to the east of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. Wait a minute. What did Samuel say the Lord said to do? Oh, kill them all. Don't leave anybody. Oh boy. So Saul took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul spared Agag the king, and the best of the sheep, and the cattle, and the calves, and the lamb, everything that was good. And so they kept all of those. And then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I am so sorry that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and he's not done what I asked him to do. And Samuel was so upset. He cried out to the Lord all that night. And early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul. And he was told, Saul has gone up to Carmel, and he set up a monument for himself. You know, that's a big statue or whatever, to honor himself. He's not going to give God the credit. It was God that told him to go fight them. No, he's making a monument for himself. And in his own honor, he has set this monument up. And now he's gone down to Gilgal. So Samuel went down to Gilgal and reached him, and he said, and Saul said, Oh, the Lord bless you, Samuel. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, Well, if you followed the Lord's instructions, then what is the baaing of the sheep sound that I hear? And what about the mooing of the cattle that I hear? And Saul said, Oh, well, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites, but they only saved the best, because then we're going to offer sacrifices to God, because we totally destroyed all the rest of them. Samuel said, Stop. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Okay, tell me. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, didn't you become the head of all the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you the king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission. saying, "Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Make war on them until you have wiped them out." Why didn't you obey the Lord? Why did you keep some of the animals? Why did you spare the king? Why did you do evil in the eyes of the Lord? Oh, I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission that the Lord gave me. I destroyed the Amalekites. Well, I only brought their king back. But the soldiers were the ones that brought the animals back. It really wasn't me. They just wanted a sacrifice. And Samuel said, "Do you think that the Lord is happy with burnt offerings and sacrifices more than he's happy about obeying him? To obey is much better than to offer sacrifices, because rebellion is like a sin that gets bigger and worse as it goes, more evil. But because you have rejected the word of the Lord has now rejected you as king over Israel." And then Saul said to Samuel, "I've sinned. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Please forgive me." But Samuel said to him, "I won't go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you." And as Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the edge of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel away from you this day, and he has given it to one of your neighbors who is better than you." And Saul said, "Please, please, I've sinned." But Samuel had Agag the king brought out, and he himself killed him. And then Samuel left for Ramah, and Samuel did not see Saul again until the day he died. And the Lord was sorry that he had ever made Saul king over Israel. Quickly, we're going to just see, what did God mean about he was going to give the kingdom to one of Saul's neighbors? Well, let's just quickly look and see here. We can see that he said he was from the smallest tribe, Benjamin. And sure enough, look at that little tribe right there. And the neighboring tribes would be Ephraim and Dan, Gad over here, Judah, and a little bit of Manasseh right there. So he said, it's going to be given to one of your neighbors. That means someone from a tribe that's right around yours a man is going to come from a tribe, and that's going to be the man that's going to take over as king since you disobeyed. So is it going to be someone from Manasseh or Gad, or maybe from Judah or Ephraim? We'll have to wait until next week to find out. Who do you think it'll be that the Lord's going to choose to take over for Saul since he disobeyed? Well, I love you all. I miss you. Hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.